Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel for another Wargaming terrain tutorial. Now this week's video we're going to be looking at making this awesome little piece of terrain here. Hopefully you'll see in this video some techniques or materials that you haven't thought of using before that you can incorporate into your own builds. I just want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters, thank you very much. And also let you guys know that the channel memberships is now open, so if you would like to support the channel and ensure that these videos keep coming and that they are coming regularly, I'd appreciate any support you can give. So let's get stuck straight into this build. Alright, now there's going to be two main elements to this build today. The first being the base, which we're going to build from scratch very shortly. And also the ruined vehicle. Now for the ruined vehicle, I found the best way to go about this, seeing as I don't have a 3D printer, was to just pick up one of these from the local cheap store or Kmart or Target or something like that. I found these ones for around about $5 Australian, so they're really not expensive at all, and they're perfect for this kind of thing, especially being that they're die-cast vehicles as well. Pulling them apart is really easy, a couple of screws in the bottom and then everything else just kind of pops out of place there. Now with the inside of the vehicle, once you've got everything pulled apart, it's up to you whether or not you want to use the wheels or the rims for any of this part of this build. I chose not to in this case, just because I don't really think it needed it. I had a bit of a play around during the build process and just felt it looked a little bit better without those wheels on there. Popping off the bumpers on the car was probably the hardest part. Just found a little screwdriver poking through, popped them out easily. Apart from that, there's nothing else to really worry about. The two screws on the bottom of the chassis, as well as these two screws that hold the doors in. Again, up to you whether you want to use the glass here or if you want to use the doors even. It's entirely up to you what you think is going to look best. I'll probably do another couple of these down the track, maybe try and damage them up a little bit more, but I just found these were perfect. The scale for these is I think about 145 or 143. Now they're probably a little bit big for the 28mm, but I found just a slightly oversized vehicle was better than an undersized vehicle. So your normal sort of Matchbox or Hot Wheels cars tend to be a little bit small for this sort of thing, so a little bit larger doesn't hurt, and these ones look just perfect with the miniatures. First thing I'm doing here is just sanding off a fair bit of that paintwork. Now I'm not trying to sand off the entire thing, I'm just sanding off some patches, some edges, some of the main flat surfaces on this thing. To start off with, I used a 180 grit sandpaper. You could probably use finer sandpaper, it might just take you a little bit longer. If you do find you've got lots of scratches on the vehicle or on the paint, the exposed metal, you can go back in with some wet and dry, some really fine grit sandpaper, and try to polish that up a little bit, and it will sort of take out a fair few of those scratches. But once we get it painted up, you won't notice those so much anyway. So you can see there how I've scratched that up. I haven't taken all the paint off everywhere, just a few patches as I mentioned. And here I'm just starting to work out where I want my base to sort of sit, where I want the vehicle to sit. It's good to have a bit of a plan on this. You could use anything you like for the base. I'm actually just using some 1mm chipboard here. I found this worked out really well. It does warp a little bit, but being that it's chipboard, you can bend that back into shape, no problem. And there's a few little steps you can take to help prevent that warping from being too bad as well. I found after a couple of days with mine, the warping has gone away, or I've managed to sort of bend it back into shape, which is the beauty of using this chipboard. Now you can see there I've used a little bit of alfoil to make the base sort of hill or mound that this car and roadway is going to sit on. Just using some really thin corkboard here, which I found in a roll at the art store. You can usually pick this up at cheap stores and stuff like that as well. It's really great for making roadways. You would have seen me use this when I made the craters, and I'll put a link to that video above for you. This is really perfect stuff. It has just the right amount of texture on it once it's painted up to look like, you know, asphalt or concrete or anything like that. So just using the hot glue gun to glue on a few pieces there just sort of makes up the cracked and broken up roadway that I'm going for on this sort of slight mound we've built up. Now for the guardrail, I'm actually using this corrugated paper. This stuff has a flat back on it, as you can see. Now I'm just running the blade along that paper on the back on that flat surface. I'm not trying to cut this at all. I'm just sort of pressing that paper in a little bit, just so the glue breaks a little bit, so that I can peel this off, as you can see. What this will give me is a two-sided corrugated piece of paper rather than one side being flat, which I don't want. This will make a perfect little guardrail here. It does look and feel quite flimsy, but just remember, once you've got this painted up and you've put the little posts in for your guardrail and glued it on, you'll find that this actually works really well. So you might need to just press some holes in with a toothpick or something to get these guardrail posts into that tin foil that we've used. This was really easy to do, just space them out to whatever you think is right for the scale you're doing. Try to remember not to make these too tall because you do want it to be a small guardrail. A bit of super glue holds it in place, and again a little bit of super glue will hold our little piece of corrugated paper here for our guardrail. And this worked out really well. I think the effect of using this for the guardrails was just perfect. I'm going to add another small section, just broken section, just on the right hand side here as well, just with the one post. And we're going to follow up now with a little bit of black paint and Mod Podge with some water. Now the main advantage of using that watered down PVA and black paint mix is that it gets down in between all those pieces of cork and dulls down that tin foil that we've used there. Now here I'm just using some pieces of pine bark, and I'm cutting off some of the edges just to make a little bit of a rock edge or rock sort of cliff edge around the back end of this roadway. This is a perfect little effect just to sort of break things up, give another little texture onto this base that we're building. Once it's sort of all glued in place and blended in, it looks really, really good. So adds another detail on the build, which I think is pretty important, given that this is a little piece of scatter terrain, and anything we can sort of do to dress it up a little bit is pretty important. So here you can see I'm just gluing a few pieces in place here, and we will build this out with some sand very, very shortly. To add in our sand, all I'm going to do is just with a medium brush, I'm going to go around and just paint in between all our pieces of cork and just above our rocks. We don't want to paint over the rocks, we don't want them fully covered with sand. Now this sand mix I have coloured with some pigment. If you want to have a closer look at how I do that, you can check out that video above. It does go into detail of how I've sort of mixed this up. It is just playground sand mixed with some different rocks and gravel, and also a little bit of pigment to get the right colour that I'm looking for. I just found this a lot easier than trying to paint or colour the sand after the fact, just mixing in some pigment, which is really cheap to buy. If you look out for those Land Ridge pigments, they're really, really good and really effective for this, so you don't have to spend too much and they go a very long way. Here I'm just finishing off the base with the rest of this sand mix. Again, it's exactly the same stuff, just some gravel and sand mixed together with the pigment, and I'm going to let that dry. Now there's one step you'll want to do with that sand. I will cover it very shortly. Before I do that though, I am just going to go in and add some rocks. So I'm just using the Army Painter Battleground rocks here to add a few extra little details in. They're really good for, picking out medium to large size rocks for your terrain pieces. They're just, I think, pieces of cork, but yeah, if you pick up that Army Painter box, you'll get a fair few in there for reasonably cheap. Here I'm just painting or putting a base coat on my guardrail, which is just a bit of gunmetal silver there. We're going to add in a few more paints over the top of that, but that gives us a good base coat to sort of start with. Now here I've just cut out a small line, slightly curved. It's around about a millimeter and a half sort of wide. This is just going to let us put some of the lines that would have existed on this roadway before it got damaged and all broken up. I'm just using a yellow here. I believe it's Demonic Yellow from Army Painter. It's not a very bright yellow, but we're just going to be stippling it in here, and we're not trying to create a perfect line across these pieces of asphalt because as you can see, the road is very, very broken and damaged. So we're just adding in a few little lines here, and the stippling effect will make it look like it's very old and worn and weathered, as you can see there. Now, I did want to change the color of this asphalt a little bit. I've just grabbed some dark stone there, and with my stippling brush again, and I say stippling brush, it is just a really old shit brush, which has frayed very, very much at the ends. I'm actually just going to go in and stipple some of this grey over what should have been black parts of this asphalt. It just gives a little bit more depth to this, a little bit breaks up that color there a little bit for us as well. And the next thing we're going to do is what I mentioned earlier. Once you've got your sand glued down and it has dried, you want to go back in with some watered down PVA glue or watered down Mod Podge, and you want to cover the entire sand surface, as you can see here. This will dry clear. You may find that this warps your base a little bit. One thing you can do to kind of combat that is to paint the underside of the base with some PVA glue, and it should sort of help to balance it out a little bit. But like I said, you can bend this around a little bit as well, this paper, this cardboard, once it's sort of set and all the glue is dried. Here I'm just adding in some final details. This is just some pigments over the rocks, also some grass tufts I've added in there. I'm going to add in a couple of little tumbleweeds here shortly as well. But all I'm trying to do here really is just blend everything together so that nothing sort of stands out too far from everything else. We want it to all kind of blend together to look like it's in the same scene. Now back to our car here. First thing we're going to do here, and I'm by no means an expert on putting on a rust texture to anything, but one way that I found works pretty well was to just go in with some dark brown. I believe I used some Rhinox hide from Citadel, and then stipple that all over the car, and then go back in with a orange or a rust effect. You can use any bright orange will work. I think there is a rust effect from Army Painter as well, which is really effective. And you just want to do this a couple of times, so a little bit of Rhinox hide followed by the orange. You might want to go back in with a little bit of Rhinox hide to just sort of add in some more of those details and break up the orange a little bit. The final thing I did here was using another pigment. This one is Mars Orange from Landridge. This one was really good. I just dusted this over the entire vehicle. For the inside of the car, I actually used the burnt umber pigment, sorry, and just dusted off the inside so that it also looked like it was very worn and weathered. I did go in with a rag here and just sort of take off the excess of that pigment that I've got on there. You can see it still leaves a fair bit of that pigment all over it. It's a good idea to go back over that, as I did, with a little bit of a matte varnish or something on that vehicle, just so the pigments aren't coming away. Now, as you can see here, this is all finished off. I haven't glued that vehicle to the base. I figure I might want to use it somewhere else. It sits on there perfectly. I'm really happy with the outcome here. I could switch this vehicle out, or I could use that roadway base as just, you know, another piece of terrain for the tabletop. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a lot of fun to make this one. I really enjoyed using this little vehicle. For how effective I think this is on the tabletop, it was super cheap to make. You know, $7 or $8 at most, I think, you know, for the individual little bits of materials that I've used. The vehicle itself was about $5, so I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to hit like if you did. You can check out some of my other videos on my playlist, which I'll link here. And you guys have a great day, and I'll see you next time.